Welcome. This is All Minus One Quick Shots. Folks, I got a couple things today. First off, I was over at the Weekly Narrative last night, audio only, but they are a YouTube channel that I've made friends with. They have come on my live stream, The Ends Justify the Memes. They were on there last week. They will be on there again at the end of March here. And they were on back in January, so we're going to keep in regular contact because they have interesting ideas. And though sometimes I may disagree with someone's ideas, I am not one to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And you should not be either. And I bring that up because I had a conversation with somebody else earlier this week. And we were talking about, let's say, Tim Pool. Now, I will bring up Tim Pool a lot. Tim Pool is a rather large channel. I do watch him regularly. I do not agree with Tim on everything that he says. I don't agree with just about anybody with everything that they say. But I like Tim for this reason. He seems legitimately honest. He is pointing out the false narratives of the media and the manipulation. He's an insider view telling you how it's working, and he's annoyed by it. And as much as he is on the left, he's not that bad. Now, I know others would disagree with that, but he isn't that bad, and he's slowly coming to a more right-leaning perspective. But why do I watch Tim aside from those things? Well, because he is a lefty. He's giving me a different opinion. I also like to watch Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore is a far lefty. He's a far left progressive. I like Jimmy Dore's takes quite often when it comes to corruption and the two-facedness of our actors in the government, those who would be said politicians. But Jimmy has insane views, in my opinion, on certain things. For instance, there was a video I watched of his the other year where he talked about this Uber driver who was going into labor and she decided to pick up a person or two on her way to the hospital. And he immediately framed it as if this woman going into labor had to do this in order just to make ends meet. Where my perspective would be she probably did it because she wanted to, because Uber is completely voluntary. So is Lyft. You don't have to work when you don't want to work. You just do what you want to do. And she decided she was going to work and get an extra fare. Hey, good on her. Labor can take a very long time. My daughter, when her mother went into labor, her water broke and she actually didn't have contractions for hours and hours later, and they actually had to induce her because of that. So Jimmy thinks this poor woman can't afford health care. We should provide her health care. She's working these hours. Excuse me. On the other hand, though, perhaps that wasn't the story. Perhaps she's just a hard worker. And she wanted to, and she thought, I can do this, because sometimes people push themselves for reasons you don't understand. Now, somebody I cannot stand at all to watch is David Pakman. He is just the worst, utterly hyperbolic. Perhaps he does a good job, but I don't think he represents anything honestly. Now, I just told you I watched Jimmy Dore. I think Jimmy Dore has good takes. We take David Pakman and we can look at his stuff and I don't think his takes are honest. And if you look at his chat, complete echo chamber. And that is the point. You cannot remain in an echo chamber and be correct, folks. You will miss things. I made a video yesterday about China, and I will be doing more on that later on this week. It'll come out Friday, and probably some more next Tuesday, if not next Friday as well. One of the folks who worked within the government, I believe his name is Michael Pillsbury, if I can recall properly off the top of my head. He has worked in the federal government for over 30 years and came to this conclusion finally that they've been helping China all this time with naive eyes. And it's like, duh, why did that happen? I can tell you why it happened. Echo chamber. You will miss things when you decide not to expand into other directions. You must do this. It is what happens when you become singularly minded and singularly focused. You need a wide net, a wide view, and you need to be a master of none, right? Jack of all trades, master of none. Perhaps you can have some some high level of skill in some areas, but you need to be well-rounded. You need to be a polymath, a Renaissance man. And part of that is listening to opinions you don't like. For instance, I listen to Sam Harris on occasion. Now, not recently, but in the past. I don't agree with Sam Harris on practically anything other than being anti-woke and his stance on Islamic terrorism. So, generally speaking, though, I don't think Sam Harris is as intelligent as he believes that he is. I think that Sam Harris has really bad takes. Same with, let's say, Brett Weinstein. I like him to some degree. I think many of his takes are misguided. It depends on where he's at. I watched him talk about the coof when it first came out and thought the guy was insane and he was totally being hyperbolic, and him and his wife are sitting there talking about these doctors that came out way back when in Bakersfield, California, I think it was, or wherever they were at, who got banned everywhere. He was saying that they had motivated reasoning. And every example that he gave, that is Brett Weinstein, every example he gave was motivated reasoning. It was absolutely insane. And I don't mean of the doctors, I mean of himself. Just completely insane, completely unself-aware. And again, I bring up this point because you must do this. You cannot just watch people who you agree with. You have to get outside of your comfort zone. One of the reasons why I often talk about Tim Pool and I like Tim Pool is because he is good for the normies. He is good to present information to people. It's like watching Ben Shapiro. I'm not a huge fan, but Ben Shapiro does bring a different perspective to people. He's accessible to folks. I talk about Steven Crowder. He's accessible to folks. I like Crowder. I think Crowder's funny. I think Crowder misses the mark on a lot of stuff. Why do I watch these folks? Because I want to know what they are thinking and what the conservative Inc. or the normie world is thinking. Why do I watch Tim Pool? Because Tim Pool does have good takes sometimes. Tim Pool is somewhat aware. Tim Pool is just afraid to go down the rabbit hole of conspiracy, right? He's afraid to say, well, this is connected to that. And he'll say often, well, no, it's a standalone complex. And it's like, dude, you are way too naive and you've been way too involved with this. And one of your friends who's on the show regularly, his live show that he has almost every night, Luke Rukowski, he's not afraid to go down the tinfoil. But again, I bring this up because you need to expand your mind into different fields. I know that someone brought up Jeremy and Delaney on the Weekly Narrative on Don the Pleb show in a chat thing, and I don't know what their problem was with them, but again, guys, you need to be open to opinions that are not yours, and you cannot be slavishly following a singular individual or just a handful of people. You need to expand out as much as possible, or you will miss something. We cannot remain in echo chambers. And to that point on Jeremy and Delaney's show, the Weekly Narrative, guys, go check them out. I'll leave a link there today in the description of this. There was a caller that called in and it started talking about the concept of whiteness and how it was all cultural and it wasn't really racial and anything else. Now, I talked about this with them. We dissected this over a course of 2 hours with some other topics. And it is completely racial or ethnic, however you want to put that. And the reason why is because it is to stab at America's original sin, if you would, as the normie perspective would say. Of course, it's everyone's original sin because slavery was a thing that existed forever throughout humankind and was recently abolished, though not globally. There are slave markets now currently in Libya. There are slave markets all over the world. In fact, especially in the Middle East and in Asia, there is a lot of sex trafficking. That is slavery, folks. There's all kinds of slavery that still exists. We fought to get rid of that in the Western world because we thought that it was evil. And when the folks in the woke sphere talk about whiteness, they are talking about your ethnicity, but they're also talking about your culture, which is part of your ethnicity, correct? They're talking about science. They're talking about logic. They're talking about hard work. They're talking about Christian ethics and morals. They're talking about the ideas of freedom, of individualism, anti-collectivism. They're talking about all these things. And we know from the history of Marxist writings that this is a purposeful tool. This is an active measure taken to divide people. It is purposeful. So that person on the show, they were talking, and I just thought the whole time, man, I don't want to disparage this person, but they sound like, an effeminate, woke, progressive. And they're just justifying their stupid ideologies. The end. And I didn't say all that on the show, but that's what they were doing. But the point of it, too, with the active measures is to demoralize everybody. And it's to make some folks the bad guys, folks like me, who are independently minded, who's basically a heterodox on everything, and believes very much in freedom and the ideas of classical liberalism, that is liberty, letting people be, minarchism, having minimal government, small communities that help each other out, that kind of thing. Because I understand that there's a balance between the individual and the collective. The wokists do not. They only see the collective, and that makes a global community. And that is insane, folks, because people over in Bangladesh or people in Moscow or people all the way down in Buenos Aires do not have anything to do with your life. The global community is a farce. It is only true in as much as that there are elitist oligarchs out there who control everything, and they get together and they discuss how they're going to run their nations and the world. Now, another thing is that the left likes to, of course, demonize those who aren't woke with them as Nazis and all these other things, and we're all horrible people. The problem is that the left are the Nazis, and I don't mean this as, they're actually technically the Nazis and they're technically the racist. Well, I would say that is true, but I mean, Nazism, right? Fascism is a left-wing ideology. It's a collectivist ideology, just like communism. They talk about this in their writings, and that nothing exists outside of the state itself. There is no history. There is no human history. There is not an individual outside of the state. This is in their writings very explicitly clear. And in the early part of the progressive era of the 20th century, all of the leftists praised Nazis. Look at the writings of Bernard Shaw or Bertrand Russell, or what FDR had to say about Hitler's regime. Look at what folks thought about it. Look what Orwell wrote about Hitler. Right? Mussolini, we could get into that, but the problem is that the Italians were basically ineffectual. I don't know if you are aware of the Japanese anime called Heptalia, which literally basically means useless Italy, or idiotic Italy, because in the Japanese perspective, Italy was like what in the West or the Americans would consider the French. I give up constantly. They were just completely inept at doing anything. On the other hand, the Germans were not. They were quite efficient, but I think that their eyes were bigger than their stomachs, if you would. But in the end, this is all about power and control. So again, don't be in echo chambers. Listen to what your opposition has to say, and I know it can be tedious. I get that, because it inundates you everywhere. But you do want to know some more of the nuance, and you need to know that in order to defeat their arguments. The other part of this, again, like I said, is power. And this person that was trying to justify wokeness, or the idea that whiteness is a thing that's not necessarily racial, it's cultural. And I get it, man. It is cultural. We all saw the infographic from the Smithsonian. It's institutional more than it is actually cultural. But the left is targeting the culture. Well, what is the culture? The culture is Western European culture. It is Christianity. It is our roots. It is our heritage. And they use whiteness because it is racially tinged. Because the nations that did not develop as quickly or as well had geographical hindrances like mountains and deserts and dense forest or jungle, that they could not build their civilizations as well as Europe did, or as well as places in Asia did. And this is an important thing to understand. So because those societies didn't develop as fast, and eventually the European societies occupied them, actually helped build them up. I know that's unwoke of me to say that colonialism actually was not the worst thing ever. And you could say, but Bill, that's horrible. How can you say that? They did all these horrible things. Do you know what tribal people did to each other? Do you know how people cannibalized each other back in the day? They used to sacrifice their enemies There was all kinds of stuff, folks, that happened with warfare when people were the Rousseauian noble savage. It's a nonsensical lie. You want to reject human nature for your own power. You want to make yourself a god and dictate what is right and what is wrong and how human beings can transcend this mortal coil and whatever else. We can transcend and become more than what our nature says that we're supposed to be. And I believe to some degree that we can. But that's really what leftism is about. And it's about turning yourself into your own god and dictating the world to everybody. And that's why they can shift the goalpost. 1 minute it's whiteness, and somehow, obviously, they colorize it, right? It's a color, but it's not racial. It's just cultural. Well, why is that culture tied to race? Why are Asians considered white? Have you considered that? Because they're considered white now. Now Slavs are no longer white. Well, why is that? Because someone got smart about the history of Slavs, where we get our word slave, by the way. The word Slav means people or language. It means a common language amongst the people. But we call them slaves because they were the most highly prized slaves all throughout Europe. But you don't hear that narrative because only the African slave trade was the only evil ever to exist within that horrible institution. Yeah, all nonsense. But my point is I listened to that person. I got where they're coming from. They're lost. But are they listening to people on the right? Because there have been studies done, many of you probably know this, that folks who are more liberty-minded, who are more right-leaning, and that left-right dichotomy, depending on what you think of that dichotomy, but people who are on the right side of that, they tend to read everything and all sources, while people on the left tend to only read leftist sources. And they'll tell you that they read diverse things, but they don't. They read mainstream legacy media often, which is a tinge of left, right? The institutions and the woke scold, they work with each other, even though they're sort of competing and vying for power. They're really not, because the institutional left, of course, controls everything, runs everything, and they're just using the folks in the street, the BLMs and the Antifa, as their useful idiots. Regardless, what we see is that those folks on the left aren't really exposed to the ideas of the right. And again, they're justifying everything in a manner of their victimhood and the power of the right. The problem is that the Democrats and the left have had power in the United States government for 100+ years. They've had power in the European governments for over 100 years, 150 years or so. I can go back all the way to Tocqueville and read you, which I've done before on this channel, his speeches in the French Parliament about and against socialism. This was like in the 1840s, folks, a very, very long time ago. So understand that no matter what their arguments are, it always goes back to power, unless there's someone honest like Tim Pool. I don't think Tim Pool's arguing about power. I think Tim Pool's arguing about what's right and true and just, even though I don't always agree with his perspectives. And again, this is where you need to find your balance. You need to get out of your echo chamber. You need to find people that you trust are telling you the truth from at least their perspective and are being as honest as possible. David Pakman, I don't see that. Jimmy Dore, I do see that. Now, again, Pakman stuff, it's so hyperbolic. I can't watch it. It's insane. I mean, I watched a video once of his where he's like, the Europe's laughing at us. They're making fun of us. Yet I know people that travel internationally and they're like, oh, you're American? Go Trump. Go Trump. So, are you really? No, that's a perception you have because of your echo chamber, David. And I see your chat and that echo chamber as well. And of course, people are open to challenge me on my ideas and thoughts. I might talk trash to you in the chat because, I'm going to have fun. But in all sincerity, I will try to answer your questions and my beliefs and redirect it. For instance, someone once left a comment in one of my videos that I was talking about liberalism, not leftism. And I'm like, no, you don't understand what liberalism is. That's a reframing because, again, the left owns all the institutions. Liberalism has Christianity involved in it. Liberalism has freedom and minarchy, the smallest amount of government. Liberalism is about basically being a statesman and not a politician. Liberalism is about leaving you alone. That is classical liberalism. What we call liberalism today is all about power and control and statism and whatever else. And again, you can read this from the left. You can read what Marx said about this. You can read what Mussolini and Giovanni Gentili wrote about this, as well as other folks who were on that fascist spectrum. Liberalism is laissez-faire capitalism, free markets, small governments, free people, independence, collectives with individuals inside of them, small collectives, communities, like I said. And the language has shifted so much, and we've allowed the Marxists to shift our language so much that we can't even have a proper conversation anymore. And leftists continue to do this, which was part of the thing that this guy was trying to go through last night in his brain, this intellectual gymnastics that just was not coherent. Because I can debunk every single point that he was making, essentially, and how this is a globalized phenomenon, how this is a Marxist phenomenon, how there's a deep-rooted history in this, how this goes back to the postmodernists, how this goes back to the Frankfurt School before that, how this goes back to Marx, how this it integrates feminism, how it integrates the communist Negro coalitions in the early days with guys like Manning Johnson writing about that, how the Black Panthers are a part of that, how all these groups tie in together, and they all have one goal, guys. It's world communism. Now, we could get into the idea of this Hegelian dialectic with all of that, and that we won't have pure Marxism. You know, we can look at China, whatever the Chinese model is right now. That's pretty much what we're looking at for the rest of the world. But again, just some thoughts. Like, you need to just go listen to people who you don't agree with sometimes, who annoy you. You know, there are dozens and dozens of channels that I watch. All of them I cannot catch regularly, but I don't always agree with them, even if we're on the same team, more or less. And I'm not one for team sports when it comes to this stuff, but it's getting to that point where we need to know who our allies are and who our enemies are. We can work out the details later. And so, to my mind, Tim Pool is actually an ally. I don't think he's going to ally with the progressive far left, even though he might be a leftist. Maybe you don't like that. Maybe you'll unsub me because of it. That's silly, guys. It's absolutely silly, because you don't like an opinion, you would no longer listen. That's absolutely absurd. You will never grow as a human being that way. And you will always be caught in an echo chamber, and you will always be underprepared. You have to be able to listen to the unmitigated truth from any voice. And if it's not the truth, you have to be able to discern if it is or isn't. So again, what is the point of all this? Well, the point is, get out of your echo chamber. Whether it be on the woke side or the liberty side, whatever it is, make sure you are getting a proper amount of give and take back and forth, and what you are digesting as far as media goes. Because if you go so far to one side, just like any expert who studies something too much, you will be blindsided with knowledge that you did not know was out there. And you are less likely to be wrong the more diverse opinions and knowledge you are exposed to. So guys, that's pretty much all I have for today. With all that said, this has been All Minus One Quick Shots, and I wish you all well.